The Temple of Eternity by J.W. Steele. Sarah and James pushed through the dense Alaskan wilderness. The frigid wind bit their faces, and the icy gale gnawed at their bones. The once vibrant forest was now a desolate, snow-covered landscape, a stark reminder of the apocalypse that had ravaged the western coast of California. The seas had risen, and fault lines erupted across the land. Untold numbers perished in the fury of tsunamis and earthquakes that followed the doomsday event, leaving the world lifeless and forever changed. They had been on the move for weeks, clinging to each other for warmth and support, struggling to survive. The first signs of radiation sickness had already appeared: nausea, headaches, and a persistent burning sensation. Their journey was fraught with dangers, both natural and human. Society had crumbled, and though they had not yet been forced into cannibalism, the idea had crossed James's mind. He kept the thought from Sarah. He didn't want to frighten her. They had no idea where they were or where they were heading. They just kept moving deeper into the vast, rugged terrain. As they trudged through the snow, a mirage appeared on the horizon. They halted, and James rubbed his eyes. "Do you see what I see, honey, or am I hallucinating?" His voice was barely audible over the howling wind. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to make sense of the indiscernible vision. "Yes, I see something. Maybe we're both hallucinating." In the distance, a dark silhouette stood against an ash-filled pewter sky. "It looks like a temple, Sarah, something ancient and..." "And what, James?" Sarah interjected. "Wicked," he replied slowly. As the form took shape, what appeared to be a medieval fortress stood solemnly amidst the snow-covered landscape, its weathered stone pillars and windows blanketed in a thick layer of white. They walked closer, and James stopped. "I don't think we have a lot of options, Sarah. The thoughts in my head are beginning to scare me. We can move on and starve to death, or freeze to death," Sarah said, shivering. "I agree. It's got to be 20 below. We need to go inside. No matter what happens, it would beat another night in this god-awful cold." Sarah took his hand. "What could be more threatening than our future, James? What are we waiting for? Let's move." They tread up a granite stairwell where massive oak doors with intricately carved symbols blocked their way. James pointed at the inscriptions. "Those things are weird." They eyed each other cautiously. Sarah raised her arms and braced them against her chest. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Let's do this, babe." With a collective heave, they pushed open the doors and limped into the unknown. The doors slammed shut behind them with a resonant thud. Inside, it was quite dark. Gradually, the lights grew brighter as if manipulated by some unseen hand. As the interior came to life, James stared out at the room, his mouth falling agape. Sarah stood as if petrified, her eyes shining like they used to on Christmas morning when she was a child. "What is this?" James said. She began peeling off her parka. "I don't know, but it feels like Florida in July in here. I love it." There stood a large dining room table in the center of the parlor. It teemed with succulent roasted meats, freshly baked bread, colorful salads, and an array of cheeses. Delectable desserts and bottles of wine stood open on the table. The food looked like it had just been served, and its aroma drove them mad. Like ravenous beasts, they limped to the table and devoured the feast as if they were stoned on cannabis. As days turned into weeks, the sanctuary became their new home. Mysteriously, all their needs were met, their clothing stayed new and fresh, the food was delicious, and their bodies grew firm. They radiated vitality and health. They spent their days exploring the castle chambers, each one meticulously appointed with lavish tapestries, antique furniture, and classic artwork that spoke of a bygone era. When their strength returned, they began to make love again. The magnificent bedrooms were adorned with luxurious fabrics, ornate carvings, and grand four-poster beds resplendent with silken sheets. Each boudoir displayed a different atmosphere of opulence and romance. On one glorious day, James rolled over in bed and stared at the ceiling. Mozart's clarinet concerto in A major drifted softly through the air. "This can't last forever, Sarah. Nothing is free, you know that." He ran his hands along the contours of her body. "Look at you. You look 20 years younger. The rashes on your chest and back have disappeared. I'm no longer so sick I want to die. The radiation has ceased to affect us. I've been waiting for you to say something about this, honey. You're as hard as the stud I knew when we got married. You're more handsome than I ever remember. Maybe we died and went to heaven, and I don't want to wake up." He sighed. "This can't go on forever. Where did this place come from? Why are we here? We should have frozen to death in the cold. Have our lives ever been better than now?" Sarah pulled him closer. "No, nothing like this. I'm just waiting for things to fall apart, Sarah. Every beginning has an end." He kissed her again, their passion overflowing. They fell into each other's embrace. For a time, their lives proceeded without incident. Then came the fated day when everything began to change. The subtle undercurrent of anxiety morphed into a palpable sense of dread. They began to experience strange dreams and vivid nightmares. In these dreams, they were hunted by a monstrous presence that seemed to lurk just outside the borders of their mind. James called them flashbacks and blamed them on the lingering trauma of the Armageddon. Sarah refused to discuss them at all. But neither of them could deny the feeling that they were being watched. One night, Sarah woke to find James standing at the window, staring out into the darkness. His face was pale, and his eyes wide with fear. She approached him. "I saw our nightmare outside in the snow, honey. It's hideous," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The monster of our dreams is real." Their world changed forever in that moment. They were now constantly on edge. Their paradise became an endless dreamscape where reality and delusion blurred. Every sound, every thought, every perception grew indiscernible until they could no longer determine the difference between what was real and what was madness. One day, James found Sarah sitting in the parlor. She'd been drinking. He walked over to her and sat down. He took her hand and looked into her eyes. For a while, she remained still. "I can't handle this anymore, James. The paranoia is eating me alive. I feel this thing everywhere, in the kitchen, in the closets, at the end of the hallways. Have you noticed the symbols have grown bolder? They're everywhere now, like some kind of hidden warning, ominous and threatening. I've never seen this thing, but I can feel its presence. It's like a demon boring into my mind and ripping the life out of my heart. I feel like I'm losing it, honey. I'd rather take our chances in the blizzards with the wolves. I'm scared." James raised his hand and rubbed his beard. "Yes, I see everything you have and more. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to get us out of here," she said, slurring her words. "I'd rather take our chances out in the wilderness." James looked down at the floor, then reached forth and slapped her face hard. "Sober up. I know this thing is real. I've seen it. I was a big fan of von Daniken in college, and he wrote all about them. It's an ancient Sumerian god they call Vexerin, a god of unending fury. Its form shifts like it's made of liquid shadow and smoke. Yet it's graceful and can change direction with the speed of a bullet. Its eyes are dead, like the eyes of a goat. It has no soul or conscience. It's a projection of the Matrix, inconceivable and hard to kill." Sarah began to sob, her tears streaming uncontrollably. "What the hell do you want from me, James?" she screamed. "I want you to look at our situation objectively, Sarah. We can't keep running away from this thing. How long do you think we'll survive out on the tundra? There isn't a person within 500 miles who cares if we're alive or dead. And even if there was, do you think they're not buried in problems of their own? We have to face this like the Aryan stock of our ancestors, ready to die for the chance to survive. James handed her a napkin, and she wiped her tears. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. What can we do? He drummed his fingers on the tabletop. If we're going to make it through this, we have to confront it. I'm not sure how to do this, but something happened the other day I can't forget about. Do you remember when your father returned from the psychiatric hospital? I recall his exact words when we brought him home. Never let the Archons control your mind, Sarah. They are vicious impersonators of all that is good. You must defy them always. I never forgot the look on his face when he said that, total delirium. I struggled a long time to understand what he meant. But I see it now. This monster is a mind parasite, and it's feeding on our fear. This is so weird, James. How can we fight it? I've got a plan. Listen to this. Last week I went downstairs into the wine cellar looking for another magnum of that Bordeaux we liked. For some reason, I glanced over at a door in the corner of the room. It led to a chamber filled with those symbols, and there were statues of demons all over the place. A massive cistern sat in the middle of the floor. It was filled with a glowing green fluid that looked like antifreeze. I remembered what your dad said about the Archons. I thought, it's now or never, James. I walked up to the pool, unzipped my pants, and pissed in the well. Wow, that woke something up. The air grew frigid, and the fluid started to bubble. An eerie light shot out of the depths. The room rumbled, and the scent of carrion filled the air. A voice that crackled like an old record resonated from the walls. You cannot escape, it said. This temple is your prison, and I am your keeper. You are immortal now, bound to this realm for eternity. It is my privilege to torture you forever. I was scared, man, I was scared. But I stood my ground. I don't think this thing wants to eat us. If it did, it would have done so already. Sarah's eyes widened. So what does it want then? It wants to frighten us to death. Maybe it's an adrenochrome junkie or some other kind of twisted freak. It may be feeding on our anxiety. Why didn't you tell me this before, honey? James sighed. You've been drinking a lot, Sarah. You're not much fun when you're drinking. Sarah raised her hand and rubbed her cheek. You're not much fun when you're not. James lowered his eyes. I'm sorry, honey. But I had to get your attention. We're not out of this, and I need you awake and alert. I can't do this alone. A ghost of a smile appeared on her face. How do we destroy something like that? It sounds like it's invincible. We confront it, James said, his voice firm. If it wants to torment us, we'll make it regret ever finding us. We have to disrupt its power. The symbols, the pool, the statues, they're all part of its influence. We destroy them, we weaken it. We attack in the morning. We'll stay in the parlor tonight. I've been watching this thing. Looking for patterns. It's most active when the sun goes down and in the morning before it rises. I see it lurking all over the castle, but I've never seen it in the parlor. I think we're safe there. Are you with me on this? Sarah nodded. I trust you, James. I always have. The next morning, they painted their faces with battle paint, the black streaks fierce on their cheeks and brows. James held her close. No matter what happens, I'll always love you, Sarah. Are you ready to die? Sarah pulled him closer. With you beside me. Always. They made their way into the cellar. The inscriptions on the walls were more vibrant now, pulsing with a red neon glow. The door to the green room stood ajar, a faint shimmering radiance emanating from within. They went inside. Semper Fi, James cried. Kill! Sarah screamed. James stepped forward and yelled. "We're not afraid of you, demon. You want our fear, now it's your turn." The pool began to bubble, the liquid swirling violently. James drew his dagger from the scabbard. "Bonsai, mother," he yelled. He lunged forth, slashing the murals to pieces. They fell to the floor torn and shredded, their glory fading. Sarah attacked the statues, toppling them from their pedestals. Each crash echoed through the temple, the ancient idols shattered into fragments of stone and dust. The shrine shuddered in response, its walls rumbling and cracks forming in the floor. From the depths of a Vici hell, the demon spirit emerged. It roared with anger, its form shifting and contorting, shadows swirling around its limbs. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent fire. "You cannot defeat me," it growled. "I am eternal. Let's go for its heart. Help me, Sarah." She rushed to his side. They ran over to the remaining idol. "This is Anubis, the god of death." His grip tightened on the solid gold sculpture, and they strained against the weight of the malevolent deity. It began to teeter. "We've got him, Sarah, push." With a final thrust, they toppled the statue. It plunged into the viscous fluid below. The air filled with the acrid smell of sulfur, and an unholy shriek pierced the chamber. The demon clutched its chest and recoiled in agony. It melted back into the cistern, and the fluid turned to blood. The room began to implode. Boulders fell from the ceiling, and the walls collapsed. "It's a cave-in. Run, Sarah." They zigzagged to the stairwell, stumbling over debris and dodging falling stones. The air was thick with dust, and the deafening noise of thundering walls surrounded them. They raced up the stairs until they reached the main floor. A massive boulder flew from overhead and shattered the staircase. The steps collapsed and sealed the entry. The roof started to groan. Stone vaulting and wooden beams crashed to the floor. Plaster and stucco fell like hail, and the old leaded glass windows shattered. "It's going to implode, Sarah. We need to get out now." "We're ready for this," she said. "Let's grab our field gear and move." They threw on their parkas and ran. The temple doors lay twisted and broken. They tread over them and raced down the granite stairwell into the meadow outside. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, the ground rolled, and the earthquake raged. James raised his hand and pointed at the ridge. "Up there, run." They climbed up the slope and stood on the ridge. Their chests heaved and their legs burned. They turned and watched the castle disintegrate. A cloud of dust and rubble stood where the mighty edifice once thrived. A deep crater formed on the surface, the ruins crumbled, and the cavity swallowed them up. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with shock. "It was all an illusion, it's like it never existed," said James. For a while, they sat and surveyed the area. A new spring had emerged, blanketing the valley in vibrant greens, budding flowers, and fresh, blossoming life. He put his arm around her and pulled her close. "It looks like we survived. Again, babe. Where to now, my invincible friend?" Sarah looked up and watched the geese heading north in the glorious turquoise sky. A tear formed in her eye. She sighed. "Our curse is we can never know, James. We just end up there."